what I would say is that I think the problem with this, the way that you are asking the question, is like you believe that there was a conspiracy theory to either turn children trans or to harm children.
No, I don't.
Yeah. So why is this story not concentrating on the actual? Because if you had a mental health centre, and there are lots of them that abuse people, we see people abused in the care sector. We don't see front page stories about those.
This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 158 for the 19th of May 2023. You have to admire the con. Sometimes you really have to hand it to them. They crafted the whole thing so excellently. They tailored every detail to appeal to the vanity, the self-regarding superior smugness of the mark. It wasn't just a generic con, it was perfectly honed to the target. And the one thing about a con is that the victim is always complicit in the con. In fact, the mark, as they're called in the business, is never really a victim because they are the person who is conning themselves. So you get the line in the street song, "Neighbour, you won't con an honest John." Right, now listen, you'll never con an honest John, because for the con to be successful, the mark has to really want to be conned. In case you've been living under a rock, or you happen to be a normal person who doesn't obsess over drama in the media bubble, the con that I'm talking about, the excellent, perfect, really delicious con, was an article that was published in the Irish Times under the headline, "Irish Women's Obsession with Fake Tan is Problematic." Well, the first thing that's problematic is the use of the word problematic. Problematic is one of those weasel words that allows someone to say something is wrong, but also allows them to scurry away from accountability when they're challenged to justify what they're saying. The word problematic, saying something is problematic in this context, means saying that it's wrong, morally wrong, but it allows the person saying that it's wrong to avoid the scrutiny of anyone who actually asks them to justify why they say it is wrong. In case you didn't catch the article, it's claimed to be written by a woman who was a relatively recent immigrant from Ecuador, and it basically accused Irish women who wear fake tan of being racists. It didn't quite say it like that. It said that wearing fake tan, quote, perpetuates colorism and racism. Again, with the weasel words. Does accusing someone of perpetuating racism mean that you are accusing them of being racists? Well, yes, it does, but it also leaves a sort of escape hatch to allow the speaker to claim that wasn't really what they meant in case they're challenged to justify the accusation. Anyway, to say that there are multiple red flags that show this article is a hoax isn't the half of it. The first red flag is literally in the opening words, "I am a Latinx woman of colour." Latinx, we are helpfully scolded, is a term used to describe people of Latin American heritage. Except it's not. At least it's only used to do that by a clique of people anxious to polish their politicized halos by showing off how inclusive they are in their language. The main thing that they show off is they haven't a clue what they're talking about. The word is supposed to be a gender-neutral replacement for the words Latino and Latina, which have crossed over from Spanish into American English. The problem is that those words are gendered. Spanish words ending in "a" universally refer to females. Words ending in "o" refer to males or mixed groups. This even persists into personal names. Maria is female, Mario is male. There is no translation of the word "it" into Spanish, or any other Romance language for that matter. Every noun, without a single exception, is either masculine or feminine. Gender-neutral terms are something that just don't exist in Romance languages. in the same way that Eskimos don't have 72 words for drunk like we do, or something. That provides a dilemma for the ultra-politically correct, whose impulse to be inclusive of Spanish speakers in the US, who are often poor or immigrants or both, it conflicts with their impulse to crowbar gender neutrality into their language at every opportunity. So they invented the word Latinx. This was not invented by a Spanish speaker, or, I would say, by anyone who has even a passing acquaintance with the Spanish language. If they had, they would know that, as well as the alienness of the concept of gender-neutral language, the letter X is almost non-existent in Spanish. The highly respected pollsters Pew Research found that the vast majority of Latino people in the US have never heard the term, and of the minority who have heard it, the vast majority of them reject it and never use it to describe themselves or others. Latinx is a term invented and used exclusively by people who don't apply it to themselves. If you ever wanted an example of cultural imperialism, Latinx is probably as good as you'll get. Now, Irish Times journalists are not stupid people. Jennifer O'Connell, the newly appointed opinion editor of the Irish Times, who presumably approved publishing this hoax article, is not a stupid person. I've no doubt she's aware of the issue around the word Latinx, even if it is more pertinent on the other side of the Atlantic. I'm sure that if she, or whoever approved the article, had paused to think for a moment, she would have twigged the implausibility of that word being used by an Ecuadorian immigrant to Ireland. But that's the point. She didn't pause to think. I got on to Jennifer O'Connell. I asked whether they have or whether they followed verification procedures at the Irish Times for unknown opinion writers. She told me that she would not be commenting. Another red flag, there are too many to count, is the core complaint of the supposed writer. Quote, "When a white Irish woman dons a fake tan for a night out, she is essentially wearing a costume that allows her to experience a fleeting taste of a more exotic identity without having to endure the lived experiences of people with naturally darker skin tones." Well, one red flag there is why a recent immigrant from Ecuador is speaking English as though she was a professor of political studies at a $200,000 a year university in the US. But the red flag I want to look at is that is just wrong. Saying that fake tan is intended by Irish women to allow themselves experience a fleeting taste of a more exotic identity is wrong. I don't mean morally wrong or an opinion that I disagree with. It's just an incorrect statement of facts. And incorrect facts that will be well known to all the arts graduates who run the Irish Times. Beauty standards are well understood to be signals of two things: wealth and health. Shining hair, good teeth, good skin all signal to a potential mate that you have good genes and are likely to be alive to take care of offspring, and they are universal beauty standards. Trappings of wealth signal to a mate that you have enough resources to provide for those offspring, and those can change over time. Long, ornate fingernails indicate that you're rich enough not to have to do housework. Before the Industrial Revolution, a suntan meant that you worked outside in the fields, so you are poor, so it was considered attractive to be pale. The wealthy covered themselves with white powder to accentuate that effect. After the Industrial Revolution, the poor worked indoors in factories all day, and the rich could afford sunshine holidays, and in the 1920s, Coco Chanel popularized having a tan, so the perception of beauty flipped, and that effect was accelerated by the change to colour photography in the 1960s. So the suggestion that white women having a tan is in some way them culturally appropriating the skin tones of other races, or part of a global pattern that fetishizes and commodifies the physical features of marginalized groups, as the article claims, It's just not true. That's not something that is debatable. It's just factually wrong. Tanning, fake or otherwise, is trying to appear rich, not trying to appear a different race. But changing your skin tones certainly does have racial overtones sometimes. I've seen in Thailand and also in Brazil that skin lightening products are a colossal market. It seemed to me on the side of almost every bus in Bangkok was an advertisement for creams that would permanently or temporarily make you look whiter. Well, make Thai people look whiter. I don't think it would be possible to make me look any whiter, but I'm not the target market. There is also a booming cosmetic surgery market for operations to artificially sculpt the flesh to make East Asian people's eyes rounder, and another surgery to artificially create a visible second fold on their eyelids to be closer to the typical European look and appear less Asian. And in case you were thinking that maybe skin whitening wasn't really racially charged, you should note that the models who appear on the sides of almost every bus in Bangkok advertising whitening creams all have, through surgery or Photoshop, they all have very prominent, rounder European-type eyes and double eyelid folds. Rounder eyes with a double eyelid fold are strongly considered more attractive, and this could be a proxy effect. Appearing more European is considered more attractive by virtue of being associated with being richer, but there's no question of the racial element. Now, none of this nuance was considered by the Irish Times when they printed the nonsense that Irish women wearing fake tan are part of a global pattern that fetishizes and commodifies the features of marginalized groups. And again, that issue of chasing whiteness is not something that would be news to the well-informed journalists there. When I Googled for images of Thai whitening cream ads, I got as many images from stories about them in the Western press as I did from actual ads. Other tells that this article was a hoax, and there were many. Other tells include the name of the supposed author, Adriana Acosta Cortez, a transparent echo of the name of the hero of the right-on US Congress member Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The photograph of the fictional Cortez published with the article was pretty obviously AI generated. It showed an overweight caricature of an activist with, of course, blue hair. So why didn't they pause for thought when they got this story with so many red flags? Why did the Irish Times rush to publish so hastily an article about such a big issue? As the piece itself says, correctly as it happens, the Irish market accounts for 60% of Penny's global sales of fake tan. Actually, that's the clue why. In fact, that is the most perfectly crafted part of the con. Dropping in the single mention about how fake tan is largely sold through places like Penny's, the one store that screams working class to any middle-class Irish person. With that line, dropped in artfully halfway through the article, the author telegraphed exactly what the writers and the readers of the Irish Times wanted to hear. It's not they who can afford to get their tans by burning their way through the atmosphere on foreign holidays who are problematic. It's working class people who buy their tan in a bottle in a cheap department store. They're the ones who are problematic. That's the beauty of the con. The Irish Times didn't question the veracity of this ludicrously obvious hoax because it told them what they wanted to hear. It confirmed that they were good, honourable people with the correct opinions and noble motives, and most importantly, it confirmed that when they curl their lip in disgust at the working class Irish people who shop in Penny's, that's not prejudice. No, not at all. It's nothing more than a concern about their problematic behaviour, like wearing fake tan, and the impact that it has on the lived experiences of the sort of people who clean the houses and mind the children of the Irish Times set. That's why the Irish Times were so eager to con themselves into printing this. And it's notable that the Irish Times was to the fore in the observation recently that protests against immigrants were an example of how anger could be misdirected by forces on the right to distract from the real causes of poverty and deprivation in our society. And that's correct. But that only sits comfortably with the Irish Times set as long as the villain of the narrative is someone who, however secretly, they really do despise. What do you think would be the chances of the Irish Times printing a story, real or hoax, a story written by a working-class Irish person saying that immigrants are the ones who are problematic? This affair skewered perfectly the hypocrisy of the Irish Times, and it did it in a fantastic, subtle, almost artistic way. That's why they're too embarrassed to answer questions about it. It exposes so much more than sloppy procedures.
How does that work? Because every con is based around someone who thinks they're conning you. He'll never imagine the whole scenario was prepared solely for him. Why should he? That sort of paranoia can get you in the loony bin.
In a moment, we'll have the interview, but first I want to say thanks to all of the patrons on Patreon, especially James Callahan, who signed up as a patron since the last podcast. I really appreciate everyone who donates. We don't get a huge amount of money out of it. It's not nearly as much as some other Irish podcasters that I could mention, but we don't mind that. It pays for things like web hosting, and Kevin and myself basically donate our time for free. And it's also a great morale booster when we get a new patron on Patreon. It lets us know that there are people out there who are listening and appreciating the podcast, and we make a big effort to cover things that are undercovered in the Irish media, not least the Irish Times. You're more than welcome to listen for free, but if you think that you could do the same as James and the other donors and throw in the price of, God help us, the Irish Times once or twice a month, there's details how to do that on the website and at the end of the show.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? Follow at Here's How Podcast on Twitter and like Here's How on Facebook for updates on each show's contents.
This is the second half of William's interview with Freda Wallace. You can hear the first half in episode 157, and if you haven't heard it yet, it probably makes more sense to listen to that podcast first. Anyway, this takes up the second half of this long interview that William did, and he's asking Freda about the adolescents and children, sometimes very young children, who have been referred to the Tavistock clinic, which is, for the time being, the UK's only gender identity clinic for under 18s. Irish youngsters were referred there also.
There are, and I'm looking at this information presented graphically, and I'll put all of this on the webpage for the podcast, but there are typically a trickle of children being referred to the Tavistock. The Tavistock is in the process of being closed down for reasons. But it still exists. I'm talking about it in the present tense. But there's a trickle of children as young as to a very small number of children across about 2,000 children. You have 2 aged 3 years, 9 aged 4 years, and then from like 5 to 10, it's like slowly growing 20, 30, 40, 50 children. 50, 10-year-olds. And then the huge jump is amongst 12, 13, 14 years of age. And this is important to understand because this came out of nowhere. And in 2009, 2010, 13 years ago now, there were a total of 32 girls and 40 boys, so 72 children referred to Tavistock. In 2020, 10 years later, it went from 72 to 2,700. And as I said, the bulk of those are aged 13, 14, 15. And one of the explanations of this, or one of the narratives that is on this pro-trans side, is that when the left-handedness was bait out of people there seemed to be a lot less left-handed people. And then when that stopped happening, there seemed to be more left-handed people. And that's not entirely irrational. But I think if you look at the figures, that explanation doesn't remotely explain what's happening. And I just want to look at a couple of the figures here. And I know it's people can glaze over when they hear figures in audio format. But the headline on this is that of that increase from 72 per year to 2,700 per year, the overwhelming bulk of that increase was among girls who were aged 13, 14, 15. That one demographic. All the other demographics expanded, but the huge bulk of that growth from 72 to 2,700 was amongst girls who were between 13 and 15. And the
I'll just accept
other yes, no, just I want to give all of this. Yeah, I will be posting all of this, and this is either from the Tavistock themselves or from academic literature. And I'll be posting the links for all of this. But the demographics are even sharper. 68% of all of the girls were listed as same-sex attracted and 21% as bisexual. And we know, I think anybody in the LGBT community will be familiar with the phrase bi now, gay later. People often kind of say they're bisexual as kind of like a way to approach saying that they're gay. So 68% lesbian, 21% reporting to be bisexual. So in other words, only 10% of them were reporting to be heterosexual. The background rate for autism in society is much higher amongst boys than amongst girls. Typically between 70 and 80% of autism diagnoses are amongst boys. But in that demographic, those girls who are that huge growth referral for the Tavistock, the background rate of autism for girls is just a shade over 0.5%. 18% of girls being referred to the Tavistock were diagnosed as autistic. So in other words, about 30 or more times higher than the background rate. So obviously you had a high degree of crossover. A very large chunk of them were lesbian and autistic. And if you look at the other indices of mental health, so whether they had reported being bullied, whether they had reported anxiety, whether they had reported suicidal ideation, whether they had reported self-harm, all of those were hugely exaggerated to the point that all of those were reported, each of those items were reported by about half of the girls who were being referred to the Tavistock. If, when left-handedness stops being bait out of people, then you get a jump in the presentation of left-handedness across society. That then seems to be a fairly easy explanation for that. But that's not what's happening here. What we have had is an enormous explosion of a very, very particular demographic being referred for treatment at the Tavistock Clinic. And what I can get from reading abstracts and looking at graphs in academic papers, I have been very, very careful to take my information either directly from the Tavistock or from academic sources. But I think we know, whether you look at falsely reported problems around HPV vaccines or around anorexia and bulimia, girls of that age are particularly vulnerable to social contagion. They're more vulnerable than boys in general, and they're more vulnerable at that time. And we've seen things, for example, like following on from the keep fit phase of the 80s and 90s, very quickly after that, you saw a huge spike in bulimia and anorexia. So I think that left-handedness analogy has no explanation power. Neither you nor I are psychiatrists, but anybody, layperson looking at that would have to say there's something very, very strange going on there, and it is not adequately being explained. Would you agree?
First of all, when it comes to talking about children and talking about autism, you said a lot there about self-harm, I think, and about bulimia and anorexia. Those are the things that are underfunded. Mental health is one of the most underfunded parts of the NHS. And a lot of kids don't get treatment because they can't. They're very difficult things to express sometimes. And one of those difficult things is being trans. And sure, there are probably a lot of autistic trans children. But the first question is, what is wrong with being trans, and what's wrong with being autistic? Neurodivergence.
Sure, yeah, but
it's not nothing.
No,
to be
but
afraid of.
accepting that in its entirety, accepting that there's nothing wrong with that, given that the standard practice with very, very, as you say, it's underfunded, that perhaps was part of the reason, but with very, very little contact, perhaps a couple of hours, in some cases 1 hour, with a psychologist or a psychiatrist, people are then put on puberty blocking drugs, which, as I mentioned, have been, really falsely reported as being. But
nobody is on puberty. No, see, you're conflating two things. When children come out as trans, as they should be encouraged to express to do, because that's freedom of expression, they're not put on puberty blockers. Those statistics you said, those statistics of people are not on puberty blockers.
Which statistic is this?
The ones of you mentioned the numbers of trans and the ages of the children.
Yeah, no, it is. That's what that is. I mean, I don't know in every individual case, but that was the standard treatment of the Tavistock.
And another thing is, if you're concerned about children being trans in this country and being on puberty blockers, well, you can be reassured in the fact, if that's what you want, that trans people are not getting the healthcare they need.
That's absolutely not what I want. I don't know if you're saying that.
Not you personally.
Ironically,
let me just.
Okay, go ahead.
I've not finished the answer.
Go ahead.
You say a lot in your question, so let me just respond. So, first of all, like I said before, if a child of 6 or even that young, that's very young, came out and started expressing themselves and wanted to say wear the clothes, the other sex or gender, whatever you want to say, there's going to be a long time before there's any. You would get therapy, but you still have to wait a long time for that. I'm an adult. I came out properly to my doctor 4 years ago. It took 2 years just to be seen by a clinical psychiatrist. Now that's an adult. Now, if you're a child, see and the thing is, the Tavistock, we know there's a lot. I'm not going to speak about the problems of the Tavistock because it's all. But then the way that it's portrayed and the way it went out there into the press is that they were harming the children.
Can I give you two? Can I give you two facts?
They were harming the children?
I think that is a significant risk, and I'll tell you 2 reasons why I think that they may have been.
Do you think those children were harmed by the Tavistock?
I think there's a significant risk that has happened and continues to happen.
So why hasn't anybody come forward and sued the Tavistock?
I can't answer for them. I'm not sure. I think there are.
As far as I can see, what the things that were the problems with the Tavistock, if you look at the CAS report, it was just not enough resources and people weren't trained properly.
Okay, no, but pause on that, Freda, because because you mentioned the CAS.
Healthcare is underfunded anyway, William.
Okay, but Freda, you mentioned the CAS report, and just for listeners, that was a report done into the Tavistock clinic, which eventually led to its being closed down.
But it didn't. No, that's not what it led to. It led to the recommendation that local gender centres should be open, so people don't have to go when you have hold on, Freda. The facts on this. Facts. No. I'm going to go on the facts. Okay, go ahead, and then I'll come back. Let me just, because you ask long questions.
I do. Yes.
So I like to give long answers.
Please do.
I write down the things you say. Right. Let's go back. Now, the Tavistock, one of the problems with trans healthcare is there's not enough gender clinics. And if you have one place where everybody's going, they can't cross-reference. They can't be. It's like a monopoly. It was like a monopoly. It wasn't quite a monopoly, but if there's one main place where trans children are going, then there's going to be problems because they're not being bounced anywhere else and comparing it to anybody else. So they think that's just the way it is. And they think that's the case. That's acceptable. But it's not. It was never acceptable. And I hope personally in the future there's a gender clinic in every town where a child can go in and the doctor, the GP knows, because they're trained to know what to look out for. And if they think one of those children might be bulimic or anorexic or might be autistic, they are helped too, because we've got to have the first thought you should have is the best interest of that child. And we know that when children who are trans come to adulthood, they don't stop being trans. They just delay that. It's just the coming out that's delayed, as it was with me. So what you're doing is prolonging somebody's pain, because we know that in the vast majority of cases, people don't regret being trans or transitioning.
Okay, but Freda, what I would fear is happening, and I can't state with proof, but I think when there is a suspicion, it is worth investigating. What I fear is happening is that there is an ideological buy-in which has as part of its core that it is unacceptable to question the correctness either of the diagnosis or of the treatment or of the premise of the whole existence of the place. One thing in the Cass report that the Tavistock clinic was excoriated for was a complete failure to keep notes and to track the clinical outcomes for the people that they were treating. Now, I don't know if you have any connection with the medical profession. I don't particularly, but I'm aware of that. The notion that a medical professional, particularly a doctor, particularly a psychiatrist, particularly somebody giving off-label treatments or experimental treatments, not keeping notes is so unbelievable that it is difficult to describe. It is just absolutely incomprehensible that even sometimes notes would not be kept, but that no notes whatsoever were kept, suggests to me that the notes were kept in the shredder and that they have been removed and destroyed.
So you think there was a conspiracy theory to turn children trans?
Do you think it's credible that an entire clinic giving highly experimental, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but it is specifically off-label treatments, that the entire clinic keeps no clinical notes on the clinical outcome?
Well, I wouldn't say
that's
no.
That's unbelievable. No, but the Cass report said that the Tavistock reported they had none.
Okay. Can I just speak to that?
Please do. Yes. Oh no. I will add one more fact. As we speak, the Tavistock are the information commissioner in the UK who governs freedom of information requests is threatening to take the directors of the Tavistock to the High Court to have them imprisoned because the Tavistock clinic is defying an order to release certain amounts of information under the Freedom of Information Act, which I think goes to the same thing of that doesn't, neither of those things to me indicate transparency and a confidence in what they're doing.
Okay, William. So is this a problem of note keeping, or is it a problem for trans people?
I think it is a problem that indicates a level of intellectual and professional dishonesty, that where you're dealing with something that is perhaps quite questionable to begin with, that is a gobsmacking thing to happen, that they have no clinical notes of outcomes. And there has to be some reason for that. That's not something that just happens by accident.
And how many gender clinics are in the UK?
There's one. Well, so far there is one. I mean, it is the decision has been made to. No,
there are 8. There are 8 gender clinics.
No, for children or in total.
There are 8. There are 8 gender clinics in the UK right now.
There's one for children.
Shall we have a look? We'll have a look at their note keeping, and if we're gonna criticise the Tavistock, we have to talk about patient experience, right? Because we know that the trans children there. You know, whatever you think of that, whether you agree with being trans or not, most of them have had a positive outcome. Can you agree with that?
No, I don't think I don't think that's established.
So how many children have detransitioned from the Tavistock?
I think that's information that we don't have available because that's something that would happen over a number of years, and what we're talking about is just too recent.
So how many children do you know, like, just talking about, because we're talking about Tavistock here, which is closing. So there's been a lot of attention on the Tavistock. Now, let's have a look at the other gender clinics and see why they fail, because they do fail, and the reason they fail is for the lack of funding.
Sure, so but that doesn't address. But it's not for the cost of a pen and paper.
Questions. You've asked very long questions.
Go ahead. But please do answer as any length you want, but focus on particularly, rather than whataboutery, focus on this extraordinary. No, but this is an extraordinary thing to happen, that they have no clinical notes of clinical outcomes.
No, William, it's not a matter of clinical notes for me. Everything you've mentioned within this podcast are the kind of things that are being used to further harm people like me. Now, I can agree with you. I can agree with you that there are problems and the Tavistock made mistakes. Now, what's the correct approach to that? It's not to shut it down, is it? Now, it's going to be shut down, and there's going to be, and then we don't know what's going to happen, because we know that the trans people that need that care still exist. They've not stopped being trans because there's no Tavistock. So we need to think about this. So forget it. Let's say, right, the Tavistock is gone. They made loads of mistakes. They were rubbish. Let's have a look at the other gender clinics.
Oh, okay, because just in numerical things, Freda, and you say about the people who have not stopped being trans. As I say, over 10 years, the number of referrals went from 72 a year to 2,700 a year. So that means unless something was very, very strange happening, there's 2,600 plus children who were not referred in, 2010. Where are they? Yeah,
well, what I would say is that I think the problem with this, the way that you are asking the question, is like you believe that there was a conspiracy theory to either turn children trans or to harm children.
No, I don't.
So why is this story not concentrating on the actual? Because if you had a mental health centre, and there are lots of them that abuse people. We see people abused in the care sector. We don't see front page stories about those. Mm-hmm. And I know this could sound like whataboutery, but the only reason you know about the Tavistock is because of the word trans.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that.
You know about it, William. So, because I could talk to you about a load of failed medical services up and down this country. Because I'm going to intervene. I'm
going to intervene there and say I completely agree with you on that. I think that is correct, and that there's you could have medical scandals coming out your ear, and that particular medical scandal, which I think it is, gets attention perhaps for the wrong reasons, but that isn't a shield against the criticism that I think. It has an awful lot of red flags to indicate that it could well be a medical scandal.
But there's no scandal from, there might be individual doctors that did terrible things. We know that happens. But to say that gender affirming care should be reduced because of those people, that's like saying we shouldn't have mental health support for people because, there's been one or two instances where there was abuse at those centres. We don't stop providing the care. Mm-hmm. We don't stop providing the service because we know it has good outcomes. We know in most of the cases, I can't give you statistics off the top of my head, but I would say a large percentage, nearly into the 99% of people that could seek help on transgender healthcare have a positive outcome.
Let me tell you, Freda, let me tell you why I think that statistic, though it may be correct, is not valid. I think it's not valid because it is a retrospective statistic, necessarily. It couldn't
I'm not
be
pulling
anything
a
else.
statistic. I'm saying it as a risk assessment.
Sure, yeah. No, you're saying that a positive outcome for receiving what you're calling trans healthcare. Yep. You're saying there's a positive outcome at a very high level. And I'm saying it's no criticism of you, but it is necessarily the case that is a retrospective piece of information. It couldn't be anything else. I'm just observing that.
If we know, I don't know what you mean. When I say that what's going to happen to those children that still need trans healthcare, it's not a statistic. That's just a matter of fact. They still need help.
No, but Freda, stick with me for this point, because I think it is invalid to judge or to make expectations about those children's eventual clinical outcome based on the trans healthcare, as you put it, of a far smaller number of people in a completely different demographic who received trans healthcare in previous decades or generations. Yeah. So I think, and it's perhaps cliched, but it's largely true that you're talking, in fact, it is statistically true, you're talking about a predominantly male group, a people who predominantly sought or received help in at least middle age. You're talking about a far smaller number of people. And I'm not questioning the correctness or the rightness of that at all. But I'm saying that it's just not valid to say that, here's a cohort of overwhelmingly lesbian 13, 14, 15-year-olds who have a huge, an astronomical rate of being diagnosed on the autistic spectrum and have astronomical levels of a whole load of other markers of poor mental health, and say, let's give them the treatment or an analogous treatment that we gave to 30, 40, 50-year-old males who wanted transition. It's a complete, and a much smaller number of them. It's a completely invalid comparison because you're dealing with a completely different cohort.
I'm not making that comparison. I'm talking about the children. It doesn't.
Sure.
So you would be happy.
Okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
You would be happy as long as the lesbians that are identified as trans just stay as lesbians.
Not at all. No. So first of all, I'm saying number one, I'm not qualified to make a decision.
I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you. I know it's a bit annoying, but it's because the thing is about these arguments. The arguments you brought to me come straight out of the playbook of Sex Matters, which is an organisation, a lobby group, and they bring these arguments in.
No, we know absolutely not. No, Freda. No, I'm definitely going to interrupt you on that. I have been exceptionally careful to use as resources, as information from this, A, Tavistock Clinic, and B, academic studies only.
Right, okay, that's fine.
The fact that people with ill intent might hijack that argument doesn't diminish the validity of that. Okay, go ahead.
I'm saying I'm not saying these studies don't exist, or that people haven't looked at trans sports and people haven't looked at trans prisoners, or people haven't looked at the Tavistock. What I'm saying is these arguments are being put on the same table, in the same books, in the same news articles, because what is the common denominator is to find the problem, to make trans people seem like a problem in society. Now, we can talk all night about sport. We don't have all the statistics about sports. We don't have all the statistics about prisons. We don't have the statistics about...
I've got quite a few here. I've got a 17-page document, but in any case...
No. But the point is that we could have 3 different podcasts about those subjects. But as a trans person, my only interest and my only point is I'm interested in the safety of trans people on the street. And the people that I speak to at the LGBT Foundation, they tell me that everyone on Twitter and on Facebook, the only people bringing these points up also seem to have a problem with trans people. Now, that is what you can't ignore, William.
I think you're entirely correct. But my answer to that is that even Hitler was a vegetarian.
I don't think Hitler into it, do we?
Well,
you've lost the argument now, William.
No, actually, I'm on the other side of that argument.
I know.
I'm saying that it is easy to find people of ill intent or people who are clearly operating in bad faith. And the fact that when I disagree with you, that you are able to point to somebody who is clearly operating in bad faith, who is saying something the same, that doesn't diminish in any way what I'm saying. In the same way as if you're debating with a vegetarian, saying that, Hitler was a vegetarian, doesn't diminish. It's just an irrelevant point.
It's not the same, because what I'm saying is these arguments have come to the table. Like, I would say, have you ever spoken about women prisoners before?
Yes.
But in the context of?
In the context of travellers in Ireland.
Right. So, that's great, because most people don't. So have you talked about female sports before?
As I said, I'm missing. I haven't talked about male or female sports because I'm completely missing the sports.
Well, you know what I'm going with this.
Yes, I do.
So a lot of the podcasts and stuff that talk about this,
I completely agree with you. But see, I think that's an element. I totally agree, and I totally agree that there are plenty of people out there making that argument in bad faith. But let me bounce that back at you, because when you're faced with an argument that perhaps would be difficult for you, and you reply not by dealing with the argument, but by saying, "Oh, you're just saying the same as somebody on Fox News would say." That's that same bad faith.
No, I'm not saying that,
because
William.
but you're deflecting and you're not dealing with the thing.
You're asking a trans person.
Yeah.
See, I said to you at the beginning of this, trans people are not the experts in their own experience. We're not experts in sports. We're not experts in prisons. We're expected to be. We're expected to answer these questions. But we have done the research, and you know what, William?
Yes.
People have done the risk assessment.
Yes. So my only real question to you, and you're right, I am not qualified to ask, and you are not qualified to answer the medical questions. But we are.
Well, I can answer some of them because I've written about them.
Indeed. But in terms of strict professional qualifications.
Yeah.
But my point is, you and I both, and everyone else in society, is entitled to comment on the human and the moral aspect of it.
Oh, yeah, of course. But when you talk to a trans person
even if people of bad faith say the same as something else, that doesn't diminish the quality of that argument. But finishing on this topic, this is clearly going to be long, and I'm going to let it go long because that's fine. It's the subject sustains it. But I don't know what the case is in the UK. I know that in many states in the United States and in Ireland, under 18s cannot use sunbeds, no matter what. End of story. It's just not permitted under any circumstances. Actually, going back to GCN, Gay Community News, and the headline on the story is, "Married Irish lesbian denied hysterectomy in case her," and then in quotes, "sexual orientation changes." And this is a case where a woman, for medical reasons, needed a hysterectomy. And I think, reading between the lines on this story, the doctor she dealt with was probably crass and crude and insensitive and not terribly professional. But actually what he did was correct. So if someone is going for permanent surgery that may have a benefit but may also have a side effect, for example, allow a woman to have children if she had a hysterectomy, it's entirely right. Obviously, they should do it professionally and they should do it courteously and so forth. But it's entirely right that the doctor would robustly challenge the decision that the woman is taking. It just wouldn't be fully informed consent if you allowed someone to make a decision on a whim. And it's perfectly valid, actually, to say to a woman, "Go home and talk to your husband about it." And maybe she said she was a lesbian. He said, "Well, maybe you'll get a husband," or whatever. I'm sure he said something not very appropriate. But the basic principle is that surgeons will always challenge that to make sure that you are fully informed and fully consenting, and that is something enduring and not something that's on a whim. Can you see how that doesn't sit very well if it turns out to be the case, and it certainly seems to be from reading the Cass report, that children were given what is called affirming care? That is, if someone born a boy shows up and says, "Actually, I'm a girl," or someone born a girl shows up and says, "I'm a boy," they are told, "Yes, you were. That's right." Mm-hmm. And that's in stark contrast to the way other permanent and permanently disabling treatments are given and are discussed with doctors. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is no doubt that there is an element of tiptoeing around the trans issue. And I have spoken to journalists, one journalist in particular who'd be a household name in Ireland and who is no shrinking violet by any standard, but had completely sworn off covering the trans issue because he couldn't take the amount of vitriol in the topic. And if it turned out that 13, 14, 15-year-olds were being put on a path that made them infertile for life, which is a very profound medical decision, based on scant psychiatric support, that would be very, very serious, wouldn't it?
Well, it's another long question there. Yeah. And I don't quite get the connection with the first part of the question and the second, but I can see where you're talking about consent.
Well, kids, to put it bluntly, if the same kid walked into a tanning salon and said, "I want to get a tan because I'm, for whatever reason," they'd say, "Sorry, you're too young to be able to make that decision." And I don't want to put it crudely, but, if the same kid then walks in to the Tavistock and says, "I'm not a boy, I'm really a girl," that, the psychiatrist will give what is called affirming care. That is to say, they will always tell them that they are correct. And that's, for example, that's in contrast to psychiatric care where somebody has, an unrealistic belief. Go ahead.
you're kind of doing the Hitler and the vegetarian argument on me, because the thing is, when children do approach doctors, they're probably not the first person they're going to approach is not a doctor.
Yeah,
because it's going to take a lot of years to see. So they've been expressing their gender as that make this. Let's think about it this way. If it's
but that lesbian woman, she probably said to her wife, she had, very difficult periods. She probably said to her wife, I'm going to go for the hysterectomy. I'm fed up with this. And so she was, being challenged by socially is not the same thing as being challenged medically and having a doctor say in front of you, this is a serious life-changing operation. You need to think hard about doing it. I
don't think I can compare those two things, because, like I said, it's going to take a long time before you see anybody medically. So if the child seems happier doing the thing, and it's socially transitioning, and it says, "Mummy, will you call me she?" and the mummy calls them she, and that must have been going on for a long time before they actually met a doctor. And children seem happier when they're allowed to express themselves. I know I did when I was a child, and I used to sort of say to the teachers, "Well, can I play?" Because I went to a school where they would divide. My teachers were nuns, and the nuns would divide the girls up into. We'd have different entrances to the school. Yeah. So I'd say, "Well, can I go in that way? Because I prefer to be with the girls." And they would say, "Well, no, that's where the boys go." And I would question these things at a very early age. So by the time it ever came to seeing a doctor, my mum already knew. She'd known for 5 or 6 years that I was doing this and going in, like wanting to be around my sister more, because I wanted to be in my sister's room because of things. But the way my sister's needs were met chimed with me better than my brothers. And I don't know why that is. I can't explain that to you. But a psychiatrist doesn't explain that. All they can do is say, does the child seem happier? Does the child seem more content? Are they functioning better? Are they learning better at school? And 9 times out of 10, that is the thing the decision is made on. It's not made on any kind of like philosophical idea of what is a boy or what is a girl. There's no kind of codified psychological, easily to map out distinguisher between a boy or a girl. It's the only thing that distinguishes you are your physical attributes. And if you're trans, it's different because you don't align with that. So when a doctor talks to a child and they're full of joy when they're allowed to express their femininity, if it was a boy, or the other way, that doctor should realise that they would be, if it's actual pain for that child to not be affirmed, you see? Because by the time they've seen the doctor, they've already had that social support.
I understand. I don't question that at all. I suspect there may be going on there what's called survivorship bias. And the classic example of this is World War II airplanes. They couldn't put armour on the entire aircraft because it would be too heavy. So they tried to find out where the aircraft was most likely to be hit by anti-aircraft fire. And they concluded that it was in the periphery, in the edges of the wings and so forth, from the planes that made it back. And that's where they put protective armour, not realising that, of course, they were only seeing the planes that came back, and the planes that were hit in the fuselage were the ones that crashed and were not surviving and therefore not being part of their cohort that they were looking at, and they put the armour in exactly the wrong place. I think that fallacy might also be applied both to gay people and to trans people sometimes, that you describe difficulties in childhood and maybe in adolescence. But I think that a huge proportion of people have that, who are not gay or trans, including me and including most heterosexual people I know. So the fact that gay people can look back and say, oh, I always felt left out, or I always felt excluded, or I always felt a bit different, that could just be the fact that everybody or a large portion of the society feels like that.
Can I just speak to that?
Please do, yeah.
So if I was a plane coming back from
yes,
I've covered myself in armour, William. The whole fuselage is covered because I spent my childhood being beaten up for being a feminine boy. Yeah. And the only thing that, I had an older brother. I'll tell you something. I know it's going off on a tangent a little bit, but I had an older brother, and he was like my protector. And he was the person that would say to me, "You just do what you want. You be who you feel, because these people don't care about you." Yep. So that's me coming back from this war. If you're going to use Spitfire analogies, that's where we're at.
Okay, that's fair enough. Can I put it to you, Freda? I hesitate to ask you your age. You can volunteer that if you want to. But can I just put it to you that might have been in a previous era, and the social and political with a small p atmosphere
I'm
now.
45.
Congratulations. Is very different now. And I just want to look, and again, steering strictly away from the Fox News, Daily Mail type publications. This is published on Reuters. So it was a very, very straight down the line news supplier. And the headline is, at age 10, this transgender model is advocating for other kids. At just 10 years old, Noella McMahon is believed to be the youngest transgender model ever to walk the runway at New York Fashion Week. Noella's parents, Dee and Ray McMahon, believe it's their job to foster her dreams, which includes being an advocate for other trans kids. The fact that she has this want to be an activist and to be visible for other trans kids, we know it is just so important in a world that, especially right now in our current political climate, that has so many things that are working against her kids like her. Noella expressed to her parents around the age of 2 that she was a girl, and they have supported her journey. What is not highlighted in that article is that both of her parents are trans, that in this case, lesbian women who transition to be trans men. A child at the age of 2 who is living in a household where LGBT issues are obviously, right at the forefront, saying that she is also trans, that's something I would entirely expect.
Yeah,
I would. No, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But shouldn't that be dealt with a degree of skepticism and a degree of, that's nice, run along, darling?
Well, that's an interesting story. And I can only speak about my personal kind of experience of being young and not seeing trans people on the telly. So when a trans person does appear on the telly and they're positive, and that's golden.
I'm sure. But you grew up a third of a century before this child.
Yeah. Yes, but it's fine. I think children don't. I mean, parents are just as horrible now as they were then. You know what I mean? It does not, just because we might think we're more.
I don't think they're necessarily horrible.
There are still parents that shame their children for being gay, and this is the problem. It's systemic misogyny that's the problem. It's not the trans issue. It's the idea that there's a certain kind of way of being that comes from a patriarchal world. It's not that. It's not coming from a trans people are not leading this debate. It's a systemic misogyny you're describing.
Okay, to park that, let's leave the children behind.
Leave the children.
There is an awful lot of use of language that seems to me to be an attempt to genuflect before the trans issue. And I guess the question I want to ask you is, you as a trans person, do you feel more included when the word woman is excluded from things, or when somebody says pregnant people instead of pregnant women? Does that give you a warm glow?
It doesn't make. I just think those things are negative. When I work in a medical setting, I never refer to a woman. People don't refer to people as women like that. You say you ask a patient their name, and if you and this, what can happen though in certain medical literature, in certain medical journals, in certain things that we put out leaflets. I see them all the time, and they might say, instead of saying women being called for smear tests, or they'll say they'll just use people and say I've heard these phrases like cervix other, but I never see them in reality. What you might see is an inclusive leaflet that says both things, and it doesn't exclude anybody, because it's already accepted that people are women if they're it's not the outlier, is it? So if you want to include a special group, like an outlying group, you might release something, one piece of information, one leaflet that doesn't say woman. And it's that one time, the one time they don't do that, or they change the language a little bit, that one time is when it gets jumped on by people that say, oh, you shouldn't be doing that because you're erasing us. It's just one instance. Now,
I'm not just one instance. Well, can I give you an example?
Yeah.
And this is from published medical literature. So again, I'm being very careful.
Is it the Lancet?
No, it's not. No. But the original phrasing was that 1 in 8 women will develop breast cancer. And then that has changed to 1 in 8 people will develop breast cancer. So that's just emphatically wrong. That's just untrue.
Oh, men
it's
can
an
get
error.
breast cancer.
Yes, but it is not true that 1 in 8 people
I don't really know the context of that.
Okay, so
and if you're trying to say,
the context is no,
women.
No, I'm not. No, but I think that precision in medical language is something that's very important.
But that's why we do. That's why we do have this. Like, okay, sometimes it can be as simple as, like the thing I described to you, where I've seen most of these kind of stories come from.
Yeah.
Is when there's been a leaflet in a doctor's waiting room, and it'll have lots of inclusive language.
No, I'm not talking about that specifically, and I don't want to go down this Daily Mail route. I'm talking specifically about when, for example, NHS websites and advice documents have very clearly had somebody go Control H and replace women with person.
So why are people doing that?
I think that they are trying to genuflect in front of an altar of inclusivity and to be seen as being accuracy is more important than inclusivity. So it is just I think precisely wrong. No, it is true that 1 in 8 women will develop breast cancer. It is untrue to say that 1 in 8 people will develop breast cancer. That's just wrong. It's there's no.
So when can I just
go ahead?
Yeah, so I've just done that search and I've got a few things come up for women. But when I put female, do the search for female.
I'm not sure exactly what search you're doing, but I'll take your word for it.
I've got 14 results talking about women. It mentions women 15 times in another article. So this thing isn't really. I mean, the reason I'm challenging it is because I do know where these stories emanate. And
no, I'm not interested in the story. I'm interested in the issue, and the issue I'm getting this directly from.
The issue exists because of this story. It's like you've got the narrative upside down. I think
people have found these errors in medical literature where people have clearly someone has done this find and replace, and obviously for breast cancer it is, although as you say men can at a much lower rate get breast cancer, so that figure of claiming 1 in 8 people get breast cancer is just empirically incorrect. But where you see that 1 in 8 people, if you know the political environment, you might kind of be clued in and from context know that that is incorrect. But you also then get, for example, reports for 1 in 10, quote, people getting endometriosis associated with pregnancy, which is just emphatically wrong. It is 1 in 10 women get endometriosis. You could then flip around and say 1 in 20 people get this, but that doesn't really tell you the full truth and say that this is an exclusively female issue. And the way that I would look at this, Blair White, who is an American trans celebrity, I guess, who I think very much identifies on the Republican side, although she says, kind of mixed things at different times. But she used the analogy of adoption, and she was appealing to other people on the right and to say, that when a child is adopted, nobody has any trouble saying this is my mother and this is your mother, this is your child. Nobody has any trouble with that. And because it's not controversial in the way that you have said that, people in certain political circles are exploiting that trans issue and pretending to be concerned about certain issues that they were never previously concerned about. And I accept that. And the point I would make is that nobody jumps up and down and says, oh, you're not really the mother because you didn't give birth to that child, or something along that line. That just doesn't happen because it's not politically charged. But equally, if that adopted child goes into, let's say, the biology class and is looking at the DNA, and the textbook says, on average, you get 50% of your DNA from your mother and 50% from your father. Nobody who advocates for adopted people and their parents, nobody jumps up and down and says, no, some people don't get any DNA from their parents at all, and that's just completely incorrect, and we should delete that part of the textbook. Everybody understands in that context that refers to birth mother and birth father, and there's there's not even any need to clarify that, and nobody ever even thinks about doing it. And if that same adopted child goes into the next class and says, we're going on a school trip, you need to get your mother or father to sign a permission slip, nobody then feels the need to say that you can get your mother or father or your adopted mother or father. You know, everybody is happy on both sides of that to understand that in a rational way, in context. There is fraying at the edges, and the people who are on that edge are generally perfectly happy to understand that the precise language may not refer to them exactly all the time, and nobody has a problem with that. And that would be my answer to, you know, the sort of trolls like the Matt Walshes who goes around sticking a microphone in a face, saying, you know, in people's faces, saying what is a woman, and that's perfectly nonsensical.
I would say to that, because like these words, woman, mother, they're gendered words because we the way that we speak to each other is based on gender, not sex.
Yes, but my point would be to you. And I made the opposite end of that same point to people who would oppose you. But my point to you would be that wouldn't it just be sensible to leave that language alone in terms of saying pregnant women, in terms of saying 1 in 10 women will get endometriosis? Nobody is really excluded. And somebody who is a trans man, that's to say somebody born who is biologically a woman who then transitions to be, perhaps only socially, to be a man, to live as a man, will understand perfectly well that, presuming there's been they haven't been damaged or whatever, that the reproductive aspects of being a woman apply to them. And I think this practice, and it occurred in Ireland, whereby it was proposed, eventually shot down after an awful lot of very bad tempered debate, that the word woman be entirely removed from, laws about pregnancy and maternity leave and so forth. I would be very clear to say that the anti-trans side need to be an awful lot less literal. The pro-trans side could do with a dose of that medicine as well, couldn't they?
Well, that's interesting, but most of those vexatious debates come from this trans-skeptical side of the argument, and it's like when they talk, I don't agree with saying removing a word. I don't think anybody can remove a word from the language. Once a word is in the language.
There's a big effort to do it.
Well, if they attempt that, then I'll give, I don't think it's going to happen. But see, what we're talking about is inclusivity, not removing words. Now, you might, like I was going to say before, because I work in medical settings, so I see a lot of literature. And we might put some words in Urdu, we might put some words in Braille, something. And it's not because we're excluding people that can see. Yeah. It's just because there's a few people that just might like to be included in that leaflet. And it's as simple as that. Now, do you think, William, I've got a little question. Do you think anybody's been harmed by inclusive language?
I don't accept the term inclusive language, but what you're referring to, absolutely. Yes, there is definite risk there. So first of all, when you have in medical reference books, you have objectively incorrect information being published because of this substituting the word person for woman. The purpose of medical reference textbooks is to help people's health. So to the degree that incorrect and untrue information is included in that, that's absolutely harmful. And in addition to that, and even if you're only talking in terms of leaflets and so forth, both in Britain and in Ireland, and especially particularly in the people of childbearing years, you're dealing with, for example, a large number of people who don't have English as a first language. So where you
mistakes can be made in the same way, can't they?
Yeah, which is why you need to be really careful to be really precise in your language, and I will give you another.
But that's it. You need to be precise in the language. But the word "woman" is not you can substitute that woman, and it means the same thing. With precise language, medical text, where the words are scientifically based, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, but if you're dealing, hold on for a second. If you're dealing either with somebody who doesn't speak, Freda, no, I'm not, because if you're dealing with somebody who does not have English as a first language, or does have English as a first language, but just isn't terribly well educated, and you start inserting scientific words because you don't want to say the word woman. I think it makes.
They're not replacing this. They're not replacing the word. They're just using, because what I'm trying to say is it's not just physical things that relate to words. Like there are mental health issues as well, and people talk about including trans and including gender, because the person that in those settings the language used means a lot to them, right? So if like, I could give some kind of example, but in a lot of cases, trans people don't tell their families they're trans. So they're known socially to their social group, perhaps young people. I've experienced this. They're known as a different name than their parents call them, or they're known as female to can I just finish this point?
Go ahead.
They're known to their friends differently. So say to their parents, they've not come out because they might not feel like they can. Now they live in a kind of secret life. They're coming to see their friends. And it's putting them in danger there, because when they have to go to, say something happens, they have to go to hospital, and everybody in that friends group is calling them female and she, because that's their identity. Now, I've been in situations where a young trans person that everybody's calling she, and everybody's and the first person that sees them is a nurse on the floor of an A&E, says, "Who's this girl?" And she's read, and then they look at her medical records, and then they say, "Oh, it's he." What are they suddenly going to start calling that person he?
I have no idea, but I don't think.
This is why
but I don't see danger there. I see confusion possibly, but I don't see danger.
This is why they don't do it, because they would call their family, and that family of that child that is not out as trans could be put in a lot of danger. And you haven't thought of that.
Okay, hold on for a second. I don't see how that relates to inaccurately saying that one person in 10 gets endometriosis.
No, that's one example, William. But it doesn't. It's not going to affect somebody in the same like a trans person. Let me give you an example. There was a lady called Julia Grant. She was quite a famous trans woman in this country because a documentary was made about her, and her surgery was damaged because she had an accident, and the paramedic that came to see her thought she was male. No, they thought she was cis female. She thought she was born female. Sorry. So when they looked at what was happened to her, they treated her as if she was cis female. They didn't look at the language that should have been used. Now, these instances happen to trans people, and they do because people. This is why doctors now say not woman. They might ask for the gender, because in that rare instance where there might be a trans person, and it could be any number of other matters that they have to take those things into consideration. Now, on a one-to-one personal level, when you're dealing with a patient, you ask them. All you have to do is, how do you like to be addressed? And that is it. That's sure. Yeah, that's
I know. That's not the issue that I'm discussing at all. I'm saying that in generalized literature, that's not specific to a particular individual.
Yeah. Yes, but that's what I'm saying. It's generalized. It's not about. It doesn't affect anybody on a personal level.
Yes, no, but clearly you should be alive to the possible variability within your patients, and you should ask. But that's a separate issue.
Yeah, but that's where it matters.
I know. No contest. I would say to that. I completely agree. But the issue that I'm trying to raise is of objectively incorrect information being published in order. So
what's the incorrect bit?
Is saying that, for example, 1 in 10 people get endometriosis. That is just objectively wrong. It is 1 in 10 women, and you could say 1 in 20 men, which is not objectively incorrect, but it is missing context that all of those people are women.
So, William, if you wrote to the trust that did that, and you put a petition to say this is confusing, they would look at that and they would do something about it. Which is because that's why we do risk assessments.
No, but let me tell you something else would happen. If it was published, I would receive a flood of social media hate saying that I was a transphobe.
Well, it's not about social media; it's about the real world.
True, but that is something that also happens, and also serious. I mean, I think that inaccuracies in medical literature are important, but also in user level documents. You and I've tried to keep my language relatively understandable. But just the internal language of the trans movement is
no trans movement.
You understand what I mean? Of the cohort of people who comment very vigorously on this.
Yeah, but we're not political.
I understand that. But you know the demographic I'm talking about. The internal vocabulary of that cohort is completely incomprehensible to at least 80% of the population.
Yeah, so that's their job to learn, isn't it?
No, it's not. No. They're not under any obligation to go and learn anything.
Yeah, but if they want to talk to trans people, if I was a medical person, we do training because I am part of it, obviously, because I'm one of the only trans people in the trust. So they talk to me and say, we've got some new people coming. Can you talk to them about being trans?
Sure. No, but
it's not about
the
language,
man on the Clapham omnibus.
It's about being a human being.
Sure, yes. But I am observing that even that vocabulary is completely impenetrable to a large proportion of the population.
That words are too confusing for you.
I am observing that most people will not understand, will just simply don't know what the vocabulary means.
This is true. Yes,
I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just observing that that is the case. And
I would agree with that. I would agree, because we live in a medicalized. Our experience is medicalized. We don't agree with a lot of these words, and they change over time, because we used to say transsexual. It tends to be transgender now.
Yeah, but for example, okay, and I would make the point that particularly for maternity services, particularly because they're often accessed by people who do not speak English as a first language and may actually have English, be quite weak in their English, and B, they're accessed by all levels of society, including people who might have quite weak educational background.
So, but that's not a reason.
That is a reason to use very direct, very comprehensible language, and not to start talking about uterus havers, and not to start talking about.
It's not happening.
And not to start talking about pregnant people, and to say pregnant people most certainly is. And I agree, by the way, that some of that is amped up and so forth.
William,
I'm not disputing that. No. Hold on for a second.
If a lady went into a maternity unit today, I can guarantee whoever they're with, they can be addressed however they like.
Oh yeah, as is quite rightly the case. I don't dispute that. And it is not the responsibility of trans people in the main, although perhaps some of the more extreme advocates might tone it down a bit. There are people who are trying to perhaps score points by removing the word woman from everything. And I'll give you one other particular confusion. In maternity services, there is a particular thing that is known as chest feeding, which is when, for whatever reason, a new mother cannot breastfeed her baby, but a small tube is used to bring a supply of milk from a bottle to the nipple, and they can have the cuddling sort of experience. And then all of a sudden, for some reason that I'm literally blown my mind. I have no understanding of why anybody would object, or think that it was discriminatory or exclusionary, using the word breastfeeding to refer to breastfeeding. But for some reason, somebody decided that saying chest feeding was more inclusive. And that then interferes with the original meaning of that. And that's quite an important thing. And that can be something that needs to be communicated to people who, as I say, may have low levels of English, may have low levels of education. Can you kind of go to Grand Trans Council and apply to put forward a motion amongst the Trans Parliament and tell people to knock that off?
It's got nothing to do with trans people that make those decisions. But let me just speak to that. If I was to go to, say my sister, because she's a cis woman and she might have a child, and if a person said to my sister, knowing my sister very well, if someone said, "Oh, are you going to try a chest feed?" and she'd go, "You what?
Yeah.
Please don't use that word. Please don't." And then after that day, nobody would ever say it again.
Okay.
That's what I'm talking about.
But then if that language is then exclusively used, for example, in literature, in some instances, it's certainly, I don't want to bore people with this, but I can certainly put them on the podcast of precise instances where those...
You can find exactly instances of anything if you look for it on the internet, will you?
No, I'm talking about in medical literature.
No, but you're not understanding what I'm saying. I'm talking about where I work in medical settings every day. We don't. If somebody doesn't like what we say to them, we'll listen.
And if somebody doesn't understand what you say to them, can you be absolutely certain that they will make that known to you?
Do you think if I said to someone chest feeding, they wouldn't understand? They'd think, oh.
I think a lot of people who have weak language skills try to cover that up.
But so you're basing this on people that have weak language skills. So in what instance?
Not necessarily. I think that medical advice should be given in the clearest terms possible.
It just feels a bit like you're trying to say that there's some control over your idea of what language should be. And we know that if you like, I'm not very well, I don't know many different languages, but I know there's in different languages, there are so many different words for in terms of defining gender, So if you went to a different country, I suppose you would have to find the simplest way of understanding something, but that's not what we're describing here. You're talking about the idea that there's some kind of taking over of language and women are being subjugated.
We had exactly that issue. No, sorry, we had exactly that issue arise in Ireland, where the word woman and mother was being entirely excluded from the act.
Well,
that was being placed before the Oireachtas. Yeah, I mean, there was a significant backlash against that.
Words out of your mouth.
There was a significant backlash against that, and people who objected to that were accused of being bigots and were accused of being bigots.
No, I don't think that's happening. I think what you might find
that was a major issue.
There'll be a vexatious person at one organisation that doesn't like inclusive language, like a lot of people don't like being, they don't like lots of things for lots of reasons, that they kick up a fuss. And instead of just like, well, perhaps, we can just not say it sometimes. And, instead of having a reasonable discussion about it, it hits the papers because you get all kinds of amazingly weird stories. I heard one story about children identifying as cats, and these stories get believed.
There are perhaps reasons for that because some of the real things that are happening in the world are so unbelievable to a chunk of the population that then when you produce something that is entire nonsense, they are susceptible to believing it.
I don't want to spend too long on the language thing, but I would say that I can always speak from a personal experience in a medical setting. I have never referred to anybody in a way that because you can look at somebody, you look at their age, you look at their age demographic, you can look and you can sort of know how to talk to somebody quite quickly by seeing, we make decisions about how that it's called code switching. Like the way I would speak to my cohort, my trans friends, is completely different than I speak to people at work. And we have these social codes because we're polite. We like to think we're communicating in the best way we can. And that's what trans people want. We want to be able to communicate our experiences and not be told that, it's an ideology. You belong to an ideology or something like that. No, we're just trying to communicate to you our experience. So that's why we talk about, language and inclusivity, because some words, words are how we describe, our existence.
I would suggest in the terms, for example, of the Act in Ireland, that it would be entirely acceptable to put a single line into it to say that for the purpose of this Act, woman refers to biological female.
Yeah.
And
rather than you're getting in some tricky areas there, you see. Because,
indeed, and I don't remotely imagine that there is a solution that would satisfy anybody. But I talked about previously, a large bulk of the population who I think have very, very little insight into a lot of this argument, particularly the minutiae of it. If you were in 1 minute to, as a trans person, address those people who don't have any particular hostility and possibly don't have any particular interest in the issue, but if you were to address them, what would be the elevator pitch you would want to say to someone like that?
Well, I can't pitch anything apart from the idea of that, like when people are trans, the trans bit isn't the important part of their life, really. Happiness is, and trying to be accepted and just do a normal life. And that's why it's important to me to be visible, because a lot of trans people don't go on the telly and don't do these things. But I think for me, it's like I need to feel like I'm sending a signal out to people that you can have a voice. Like some small, we were talking about trans children before. It can all sound really negative, like it's this horrible thing that's happening to children. So there was a lovely moment on TV. Do you know the show The Voice?
I'm not a big TV watcher, but I'll take your word for it.
Well, there's a show called The Voice, and there's a version of it called Voice Kids. And there was a trans girl on there. And it was just lovely to see, she was celebrated by her parents. It was just, and I think if you when you see things like that, that's what, it's not a pitch. I don't have to sell my identity to you. And if you look at the things trans people actually do in the real world, because we're always compared to prisoners, we're always compared to criminals, because these are the hot button issues of the day. But most trans people are doing jobs like me. We're in the NHS, we're doing in the military even. We're doing all sorts of normal things. Working in Asda, I don't know. We're just doing normal things. And when we're doing those jobs, we don't want to talk about these issues because they're not being the trans part is not necessarily important to us. What's important is that people understand that we don't opt into this. We didn't opt into being trans. Now, you could have a big discussion about what makes somebody trans, or if it's a choice, or how do you decide whether to go on hormones and all that. But people do opt in to trying to harm us. And the list of arguments you presented today, but while they are relevant and why all those things are important to discuss, those arguments are being weaponized by some of the worst people you could possibly imagine. And I can tell you that on authority.
Freda Wallace, co-host of the Gender Nebulous podcast, media facilitator, trans rights advocate, and work with the NHS. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you.
Go to the website for sources and references from the show. And while you're there, you can like the show on Facebook, follow the show on Twitter at Here's How Podcast, and catch the Gender Nebulous podcasts that Freda does at gendernebulous.co.uk. And get in touch with us if you want to suggest a guest or a topic for a future show. And thanks again to all of the patrons on Patreon, especially James, who signed up recently. It covers the cost of keeping the podcast going. And if you could throw in the price of an Irish Times once or twice a month, please do go and sign up at patreon.com/here'show. That link is on the website. Also there you'll find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone, or by email. All that information is at www.here'show.ie. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. The co-producer is Kevin Wolf. Thank you for listening.